Welcome back to Tabletop Assault. I'm Ross, and today I'm going to be looking at Warzone and mission packs, and it appears that they're going away. Now, this could mean many things, and I'm a bit interested about this because this has been an area of the hobby I've been quite passionate about ever since really the Warzones came out. So to begin this, just to say, if you've looked at any of my Warzone books that I have reviewed, you will notice that I'm very negative of them. In fact, I think they were one of the worst parts of the game at the moment. I just felt that they didn't give very good value, especially to the match play area, where they drip-fed rules that I just don't think did anyone any real favours. And so I want to talk about the purpose of these books, because other than money, and we know, well, Games Workshop is a business that's trying to make money, there were ideas behind these books that they wanted to achieve, but why did they fail? Or I believe, why are they failing? And I think that is the main reason why we are seeing that them going to Last Chance to Buy. We'll see what the future holds on them, but I want to talk about these 2 points. So, what were the purpose of these books, bar money? Because we always know Games Workshop is a business. Almost everything they're doing with is the intent of money because, well, let's face it, they're a for-profit business. It's what they're going to do. So they want to expand the narrative, and this has been an area that I think 40k has struggled with in some ways, and that was really to sort of try and bring the narrative more interesting parts and different factions all having action throughout. Now, they have done this in different ways with the books, etc., in terms of just novels that people can buy, but they also wanted to have these campaign books that we saw, some of them in 6th and 7th I think, and certainly we saw Psychic Awakening, so Warzone and Crusade were the newest versions of that. The books were trying to expand narrative gameplay. Now I think this is an interesting one because 9th edition really did try and push narrative campaign, and largely I think it still is. It's interesting that with the pandemic going on and narrative games largely being games you need to play, over a consecutive amount of time, and you really need to do them a bit quickly, a bit like if you're going to play any sort of role-playing games where you've got a series of characters and people you're going to play with. If you don't play a narrative campaign and you forget for 2-3 months, it's largely probably going to fail. And during the pandemic that might have been quite difficult, and I think that's just because they had it in production way beforehand, but really they wanted to bring people more interested into narrative gaming, and I think that was a good idea, and still think it's a good idea. There's plenty of options of ways that they can expand and build your own campaigns. Lastly, and for these books, this one really goes out to the Warzone books especially, is that they wanted to expand rules for match play and really to add more play styles and rule options. This made them in large parts necessary to buy, and I say that in inverted commas. So why did they fail? Now the first one is too much narrative gameplay. Now when it came to the mission packs, they were all about narrative, and I get that, and I think that made them optional to the people who want to play narrative. And I didn't really look at these books so much because I'm not much of a narrative player, but I think they were okay value. People who bought these with the intent to play narrative, please tell me in the comments. Were they good? Were they not good value? Did they add more to your gameplay? Really interested to find out on that one. Overall, as I saw them as not necessary buys, I thought not bad. The Warzone, however, was a bit too restrictive. So the missions you played in that was really to try and play the actual Warzone. So when it was Charadon, it was reenacting this actual narrative. Now, some people are into that. I personally don't know anyone. If they're going to do narrative, more people tend to want to play their own and have options to expand and explore their own narrative. And that's where I think the mission packs kind of succeeded. The Warzones definitely did not. Narrative stories were not multi-platform. Now, this is one that people might disagree with me on this one. Psychic Awakening, I believe, owes a lot of its success to social media. Now, what I mean by that is that if you remember running up to Psychic Awakening, there was a lot more stories that came out on social media, and some of them were absolutely excellent. I remember one where I think it was for War of the Spider, where it was Primaris Marines being declared heretics because the chapter they were going to join had just recently fallen into Renegades, and you saw that chapter fall to Renegades in another post, and it was really, really interesting. There was a good one about Fabius Bile. Generally, I really loved War of the Spider, and a lot of that came from social media. It didn't just come from the books themselves. And I just don't see that in terms of multiple ways that they can expand these stories. I didn't hear too much about Charadon. I didn't get any great stories about them. And generally my care for it didn't really actually boil up. And I think that was a poor thing. They could have really, I think it's very, very bad that they don't try and collect these stories. I don't know how you'd maybe find some of these Psychic Awakening stories. I suppose you could troll through the Warhammer community pages and they'd still be there. But I really like these wee stories that built into that area. And I just don't think that they actually expanded on it too much. They were also poor value, where Psychic Awakening could be considered limiting in the additional rules. I think the one that was fantastic was the Chaos Space Marines one. That one was fantastic, and I still stand by, if they plan to do supplements, I think that would be the best way to do it, is how they did it with Chaos Space Marines. It was a fantastic one. Again, some people just hear supplements and just do not want them, and that's fair in itself. They just want one book and they'll do. Fair. I think if they were to do supplements, that is the way to do it. Now, how they were doing it in Warzones, in my view, was predatory way of exploiting your fan base. They were creating codexes, then having additional rules in different books straight away. And sometimes it was only about 6 to 8 pages worth of content. Then they'd have another book come out, sometimes in a couple of months, sometimes not long afterwards, where it was more rules, but they all felt like they could either have been in one codex book, or if they were going to create a supplement, then you had to have these different factions happen in just one book. Having them in multiple, and I think this happened for Adeptus Sororitas and Adeptus Mechanicus, they had different books with different factions in them, and I think that was really, really bad. At one point I calculated how much the Adeptus Mechanicus books, if like within 6 weeks, it was a lot of money to spend. I think it was £90 for all their books, and they'd only just came out, and I think that wasn't very good. The other part of Psychic Awakening that was good about them is that most of the codexes all came out, and thus they'd been able to get feedback in terms of playstyles. When it came to Warzone, they came out almost instantly, so they didn't know what actually worked and didn't work for the factions. And I just think generally, very poor value. And the last thing is, and I think they failed, is because we voted with our wallets. When Charadon came out, it was, I believe, £35, and then they reduced it to £30. The recent price hike has changed the price again. But they basically reduced, Charadon was £35, the next books were £30. And they have never really reduced prices before like that. It might be in areas, but simply put, they must have realised that people were not buying books. Either if they were into narrative play, they might buy them. But if they were buying it for the Adeptus Mechanicus rules, it could only be sometimes 8 pages worth of rules, and it just wasn't enough to make people go, that is worth its money. I think even Drukhari was even less rules, and it generally was poor value. So they reduced the price, but £30, even for what you're getting there, was not good enough. And I think, if I'm to be brutally honest, that's a success story. And now this is maybe the part where we're seeing that they have realised that this was not a good idea. That we don't enjoy these Warzone books because they add in such small amount of content, when there's easier and better, more value way for customers to get better rules for us and to add more to the game. And these were just becoming exploitative in terms of the price for us. So I can only say in terms of that was great success. They must have realised they're not spending the money on it, and it must cost money for them to develop these books, and now they are going away. Though we are seeing the back of several of these books that were published last year, though not even very late last year, there are some concerns with this. So, where will these rules go? Because future players need access to them, because, well, they are still playable as far as I'm aware. People aren't going to buy rules that came out 4 or 5 months ago, especially for the later books, and not have them playable. That's just not on, quite frankly, especially when they were optional rules. These were rules that really you kind of had to have, but you also didn't. And then you go, oh, a few months later, not usable. that would not be the right thing. If they're no longer going to be in print, will we only be able to buy them digitally, in which case, are they going to be free? Mainly because I don't think everyone, though digital is largely a lot of people consider the way forward, some people don't really want to buy their books digitally that way. We will see on that side. I don't see that entirely happening, and I kind of don't see it happening to be free. The other part of them being free as well is that would be quite poor value for those who've already made the purchases, simply because they may have bought them for only a few pages worth of rules, and then they become free a few months later. That might be tricky. I think overall it would be okay, but some people might be really, really annoyed at that, and quite justifiably as well. But if they are moving away from this area, then maybe that might be the right way to go. Give the rules for free, admit it was maybe not the best way to publish these rules, and we've all got to move on. Hopefully next time they might ask a few more people in terms of the best way to make these books. Last thing I think that they surely shouldn't do is invalidate all these rules. They just came out for some of them. Some are nearly a year old, but some are quite new. And I think that won't happen, but again, it's not without of the realm of possibilities. So the future. This is more or less me speculating on this side, and I mean all of these kind of are, is that Crusade in some way should possibly stay. I like the idea behind it, but again, people who play narrative can probably be a bit more informed on this one and let me know. But I think if you're going to expand the narrative and the gameplay of narrative, then Crusade books, in a fashion, though they can change slightly, would be the way to go with it. Expand the narrative, have a wee campaign part in there in terms of stories between factions, and also how they played. I think they were a good idea. Supplements, which fundamentally was what the Warzone books were, along with narrative campaigns specific to them. Now, they are contentious. People sometimes do and do not like supplements. I do, but I like it when they're written well, such as the Chaos one from Psychic Awakening. So you really need to think about, if you are going to have these supplements, they need to be done better. They were probably the part in these books I thought the worst and terrible idea, and predatory towards people's need for rules and needs for updates, or at least needs for collective rules, and then they separate them into different books. That cannot be the case. They've got to be under one book. I quite like the supplements. Look at the Space Marine ones, or even the Chaos ones, where you have the general way to play them, and then the supplements expand on the way in terms of specific factions. You know, your Imperial Fists play different to your Space Wolves, and your Emperor's Children certainly play differently to World Eaters or Night Lords to Thousand Sons, etc. So I do think there is a need for supplements in terms of maybe expanding them, because they would essentially, if you made them all part of the codex, it would almost double the codex size in some ways. So I wouldn't mind an additional book of that does expand on the factions as a supplement, but make it one book and make it good value and well written. None of these splitting them apart, because that was just not a good idea. Now, my last concern is, quite frankly, they could just be keeping on going with what they're doing. We might be saying goodbye to the olds of the 2021 stuff, and then the 2022, as they announced with Seasons, that there might be more books. We are seeing Warzone Nachmund, which has the Vigius Alone book has came out, and they had a Crusade book as well. So I don't know, because these are both recent books, they are not being taken off the last chance to buy. They should still be purchasable, but I'm largely a bit questioning on them as well. I really don't know what the future is going to hold in them. I'm hopeful that they actually do move on from this sort of format, but the sheer fact that these books did come out and they're still up for purchase, well, I suppose if they made them no longer usable within nearly a month and a bit since they're purchasable, it would be quite bad. But this also makes me think that they may just keep on going, and the old books they're just not reprinting. And that is it for my thoughts on Warzone and mission packs going away. Do I think they might be going away totally? No, they might not be. We have had recent books recently, but this is a promising sign that they have seen these not go well. The sheer fact that they're getting rid of all these new products, which I don't know if it's the best thing they are going away necessarily, because people may have not had value from them, but they must know that these are not a good format. They have reduced the price from when their first iteration of them, and then they realised that they needed to lower the price, but it just wasn't enough, because the value wasn't there and it felt predatory. And I complained about a lot in my reviews, and I'm hopeful that even if one person listened to them and realised that maybe they need to question in these purchases, and maybe Games Workshop, they probably didn't listen to us, but they may have got the feedback from the customer base, certainly in terms of purchasing, that they were not happy with these. And I've got nothing against expanding rules, but they need to be value, and you can't just force people, well, not force them, but put them in such a way that you're drip feeding them rules behind more purchases. People want to spend their money and feel valued. But we know the recent stuff, with Games Workshop, some people would argue that is not the case, and I'm hopeful in these books they have realised that they need to do better, and I'd be happy with it. It was partly the thing I think was worse that Games Workshop did, because I don't think these books, for the gameplay predominantly, were very, very bad for the game. And I would be very thankful to see the back of them, but I do not know if that is going to be the case. I'm hopeful that maybe they're going to be replaced with a format that is more rewarding, but we can only see that as we go into the future. So thanks again for watching. Please comment, share, like and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts on the Warzone and mission packs. Did you think they were good value, especially mission packs? Let me know, I don't know about them at all. Is there any redeemable qualities to them? I'm not 100% sure. But there is things they can do to make better products on these, and I have a few ideas on that one, but whether they'll go ahead with something like that, well, one, I haven't published anything about it, so they'd have to read my mind, but there is still possibilities, and I hope that they realise that they need to shuffle up this approach and come out with something better. So thanks again, and we'll see you on our Tabletop Assault Battle Report.